Hey YouTube, welcome to the first installment of a new series that I'm going to start doing, hopefully, which is essentially Adventure Time Card Wars set reviews. So the first one, I decided to do it in order of when I actually got them, and the first one then would be Lemongrab versus Gunter. I got this first because Finn and Jake wasn't in store, and this was the only one with like two characters that I really liked. So I thought I'd go for it. What's interesting about this set is that I think it's really good for collectors, the sets where the decks have multiple planes in it, because it means players who are just starting out get a bit of a taste of multiple landscapes rather than just learning how to use one. In this instance, players will learn how to use four, either using one deck and playing against the other, or swapping and playing both decks. But it also it's not only helpful for giving them experience with what different planes do, it shows how multiple planes interact with each other, and I think that's really helpful. So we're gonna just go straight in. This is a pre-opened box. I've been playing this copy, and basically I thought I'd just show like what comes in the pack first. So first of all, we'll start with the hero cards. We've got Gunter and we've got Lemongrab. Now these are interesting because Gunter really interacts with the deck and Lemongrab just has a passive effect that is really helpful. I think they're both really good heroes. I definitely wouldn't say either of them is bad. But obviously Gunter is only useful in Icy Lands based decks, whereas Lemongrab gives you 1 health back at the start of your fight phase as long as you aren't on 25 already. You get your frozen tokens as well as your hit points, which is another reason it's good, because it introduces you to different mechanics, such as the frozen tokens. You would think that it'd maybe be confusing for newer players, but it's actually, it's so simple, it's not difficult to play around at all. Next we have the landscape cards. So it comes with 2 blue plains, 2 icy lands, 2 sandy lands, and 2 cornfield. The blue plains and icy lands go with the Gunter deck, and the cornfield and sandy lands go with Lemongrab. It also comes with a copy of the rules, and all of it fits snugly in the little box. There is very little reason to take it out of the box unless you want to sleeve your cards up, which isn't a bad idea if you're going to start buying packs and getting like hollows and stuff, because they do scratch very easily in this game. So I'm just going to move these extra bits out of the way for a second, and now we're going to talk about the 2 decks. So what comes in the pack is 2 decks, the Lemongrab deck and the Gunter deck, as well as a key code card, and that will help you decipher the codes on your icy infiltrators. And I think there's a card in the Lemongrab deck as well. But this is a thing that is found in, I think, every collector's pack, and it gives you a code you can use on the Adventure Time website. So one thing that's really good about these decks is that they actually interact with each other. There's cards in the decks that specifically counter the other deck, which is why this pack is really well put together. There's not so many in the Cornfields deck, the Lemongrab deck, but there are plenty in the Gunter deck. So we'll talk first about some of the concepts in both decks, and then we'll talk about why cards in the decks help counter each other. So starting with the Cornfields deck, the basic concepts are paratroopers, which are essentially cheap characters who have negative effects that can move to your opponent's field and can't be replaced. They are good for limiting your opponent, but as I mentioned already, the decks do counter each other. So if your opponent freezes, for example, a thing with static paratrooper on it, then Gunter gives it +1 attack, and all of a sudden it's attacking you. Because if you put this on your opponent's field, you're not going to put a character in front of it to kill it. You're just going to leave it blocking up a lane. However, this is very helpful because it moves, it can move itself into an iced over landscape, or you can use it to block up your opponent's landscape, so they have to discard cards to use their frozen landscapes, and so on and so forth. So there are the Paratroopers, the Sandylands cards, which don't have a general theme in this deck, but a lot of them are quite helpful. This one, for example, is very strong if you don't have many creatures, as it gains 2 attack for every one of your empty landscapes. This wasn't an effect that I thought was worth saying he's one of the best cards in the pack, but he's definitely very strong in the right situation. And your final mechanic is flipping landscapes face down. Again, you'd think this might be a bit confusing for new players, and it is to some extent, because they start questioning whether they can play things on top of their flipped over landscapes and so on and so forth, but they absolutely can. Anything you wonder about, you can just consult the rulebook on, because it really does give a lot of clarity to the game. It even has individual rulings on the cards in there. So this is the final mechanic, is flipping your landscapes down to gain power from doing so. A lot of the cards that flip the landscape down are very weak, but the cards that gain the power can be quite powerful. So that's the essential... there's one more. Zebracorns. How Zebracorns work is they essentially gain defense or power depending on how many different types of landscape you control. Now, this isn't particularly good in this deck because there's only 2 different types of landscape, so they only get +2. However, it is helpful. They do get some boost, and it's definitely not bad. That's all the concepts in this deck. So now we're going to talk about how the Gunter deck counters them. First of all, Industrial Assassin is very helpful for the Gunter deck in sacrificing the Paratroopers you put on their team, on their field, because you can destroy this and draw a card. You have to flip this as well, but it's worthwhile if it's saving you from taking damage. This Paratrooper, for example, does the player's hero 1 damage a turn. Another Paratrooper makes them discard a card. If you want rid of that negative effect, Industrial Assassin is a good way to get rid of it and still let you draw a card. Another way you can make your opponent suffer for putting his Paratroopers on your field is Spazzy Cola. You can power them up and then hit your opponent in the face with them, and then make them regret giving you creatures in the first place. And the final way is Cuteness Overload, which essentially lets you do Industrial Assassin's effect, but it costs 0 actions, you don't have to floop anything, and you can destroy as many creatures as you want. It's also a very helpful card in general. This is a really good card, but there are only certain situations where discarding a monster is going to be beneficial to the deck. So for that reason, I haven't put it in the top 3 cards in the deck. So I'll start off by talking about my top 3 cards in the Lemongrab deck. So my top 3 cards are TN Timmy, in no particular order, I'll add. I really like this guy because he is a rainbow creature who always turns up at the right time when you need a rainbow creature. Rainbow creatures with 0 cost are always really good. What this guy basically does is when he's KO'd, he does 1 damage to all your opponent's creatures, which is an incredibly good effect. However, you know, it's very limited in how much damage it's going to do. The next card I picked out is Grand Mummy, which is a very strong card if you can keep it alive. It's got very weak toughness, it only having 3. However, if it survives until the start of your next turn, you can return it to your hand and draw 2 cards. So that's incredibly good. And finally, another card, the main card, Cornfield's card that is, in the deck for me is Quakemaker. Now this guy is a cheap 1 action that gains +2 attack for every face down landscapes. So there's only so many times when that's going to be really good, but it is really good when it is. I picked that over others because of extra action costs. I think for the action cost, he is most worth it. There aren't a lot of cards in this deck that particularly stand out. You'll find in my Jake and Finn deck review that there are a lot more cards that are specifically worth mentioning as the best cards in there. However, in this deck, there aren't any particularly good ones. I don't really rate this deck very strongly. It definitely has some good concepts in it. It's just not particularly good. And that is why there is this sheer amount of bad cards in there. And this isn't necessarily saying that they are bad cards. I just don't think they're very strong for what they do. I think there are better options out there. So the first of those is Silo of Freedom. This essentially allows you to discard a card and change a landscape to a different type. This is useful for your Zebracorns, however I feel like paying an action for it and having to discard a card isn't worth it. When your Zebracorns, if you were using them in a constructed deck, would be used, you'd have your landscapes constructed that way. So in this instance, as soon as you start making a deck around them, this is useless. Next is Rock and Roller, who I feel like is just not worth 2 actions. There's a guy in the Jake deck called the Traveling Farmer, who's a 2 cost with 12 toughness, and he does your opponent 1 damage for every card in the hand. It's a very excessively good card, but this is just disappointing. It essentially flips a landscape in the player's lane face down and then goes, but I have always felt like he is incredibly weak for what he does. Next, I have picked Sinkhole out. Again, I think this is a bad building. You have to discard a card and floop it to turn a landscape face down until the start of the next turn. It costs 2 actions to play in the first place, and there are a lot of cheap ways to get your landscapes face down. There is a rainbow spell that costs nothing that turns them face down until the end of the turn, and I feel like there are plenty of easier ways to get them down. Now this is one that I hated putting on the list. This is Caramel Camel. Basically, when a card leaves the field, it sticks to him and he gains 1 attack and 1 defense. Unfortunately, because he's only got 0 attack and 4 defense, it takes a long time and a lot of cards to actually make this worth doing. And most of the time, he's dead by the time he's able to do that. I really like the concept behind this card, but I really don't like the execution. They needed to start it off with maybe even 1 attack, maybe 2, and have the stick be a benefit to him, not a necessity. Next thing I've put in is Hamfist. You lose 5 power on 1 creature and draw a card. And although there are instances where you can do that, which is very conditional, there are much better ways to draw a card. For example, Cuteness Overload. Just discard whatever creature is being useless and draw a card. And there's many other ways in other decks and stuff. One thing that's worth mentioning is a card I got for the Glory Booster called Incredible Egg, which is basically, for those of you who play Yu-Gi-Oh!, a 2-card duality where you discard the other card. You reveal the top 2 cards of your deck, add 1 to your hand, discard the other. That is better than Hamfist, in my personal opinion. Next we've got Paratroopers in general, because the 0 cost one is okay because you play it for free and then your opponent gets -1 health every turn. However, I feel like ones where you have to pay actions, particularly 2 actions, are very bad. Now this Paratrooper is not one that you play at your opponent's field. You use this to turn your own landscapes face down permanently. And although it's really good to be able to turn it down permanently, it's a 2 action creature that has 2 power and 4 toughness, which is pretty bad. Again, this one is a 2 action cost creature that you then give to your opponent. I don't think that's ever going to benefit a player. Adjacent creatures to him get -1 to their attack, so it's not even a particularly good degenerative effect. You might -1 from 2 creatures at best. The fact, I don't think I can ever see myself playing a game where I want to pay 2 actions to give my opponent a creature, but I could be wrong. And very similar things go for the Jinxed Paratrooper. However, forcing your opponent to discard cards every turn is quite helpful in the game in the long run. And the final card I've picked out as a terrible card is All Corn Eye. Now, I got this card twice, once in a booster and once in a deck. And one has a 2 action cost and one has a 1 action cost. And I thought, with the one in the booster, I thought, great, they've errated it, so it's actually an okay card. And they certainly have not. It's the 2 action cost creature who is the correct one. And unfortunately, he's not worth it. He gains 1 defense for every landscape type you control, which in theoretical, the best he can get is 4/5, which isn't particularly bad for a 2-cost creature. However, when you have to build your deck around getting the 4/5 2-cost creature, it suddenly becomes bad. The next thing we need to remember is the fact that this only comes with 2 landscapes, so he in this deck is only a 4/3 for 2 action cost, and that is terrible. Luckily, I picked up a booster around the time I first played this deck, and quickly took a number of those cards out. The Paratroopers and stuff stayed, but All Corn Eye and a few others went wayside. Not particularly for better cards, even. Like, some of the cards in the booster weren't particularly good for this deck. It was just better options than what they had. Next, I'm going to talk about the 3 best cards, in my personal opinion, in the Gunter deck. So first of all, Glacier Racer. Now, my girlfriend's dropped this on me a few times, where both landscapes have been frozen, and then all of a sudden this is a 6/6 for 1 cost. And that's insane. It gains 4 attack if both landscapes in its lane are frozen, and that's just so easy to do. And then all of a sudden you've got a massive beater on your hands, and he starts causing a lot of problems. The next card I've pulled out is Icy Commando. This guy gains 1 attack for each landscape with a frozen token on it, and it's very easy to get a lot of frozen tokens anyway. Plus, if he's frozen himself, he's going to get the +1 from Gunter. And if you have the floating ice palace in the same lane, he's going to get +1 again for every frozen token on the game. And this is only a 2-cost building, which I say that as if there's 3-cost buildings, but yeah, it's it's not difficult. There's no further cost to it. I mean, to be able to use it with him. So essentially, if there's 3 ice tokens on the field, he's going to get, including on him, he's going to get 6 to become a 7 to become an 8, and that is incredibly good. And the final card I've picked out is Icy Infiltrator. A rainbow creature that costs nothing and has power is pretty good. A rainbow creature that costs nothing and has power and freezes its own landscape when it enters play is very useful in this deck. And there are a lot of times when Icy Infiltrator has particularly won games just for turning up in the right time and stopping your opponent from winning. The worst cards I picked out start with Fatigued Librarian. This is a 3/4/1 cost, which is not particularly bad, but because it's a fatigued card, it comes in exhausted, and then you have to play around it. And although I don't think the exhausted mechanic is bad, I feel like the 3/4 Wardiak Ringleader is a much better choice. For example, there are definitely cards in the fatigued line that are better, but I feel like for him, what he brings to the table is very minimal, and bad things seem to happen when he's around. He doesn't seem to bring a lot to the game. Wardiak Ringleader dies a lot, but he's good. He would theoretically die in the same amount of battles. The next card I've pulled out is Mage Napping. Now this is a very conditional card, and the like of which I haven't seen since or before in Card Wars. It only works if you control 1 or fewer creatures and have 15 or fewer hit points. So it's very conditional right from the off, and it costs 2 actions to do so. However, you can move any target creature to any empty landscape you control. So that means you can take over one of your opponent's monsters. However, I feel like the conditions and the cost of the card are never going to make this worth using. There may be once in a lifetime situation where it would be useful, but this is definitely the type of card you want to drop for more reliable cards as soon as you start editing the deck. And the final card I picked out is Snowavalanche. Not for any particular reason, this isn't a bad card. It's a rainbow spell that does 2 damage to each of your opponent's creatures if they have a landscape with a frozen token on them. And now essentially, what that does is theoretically burns a lot of your opponent's creatures. However, it never seems to turn up when your opponent's actually frozen, and you never seem to freeze your opponent when it is there. Though this could just be my personal experience, it's never been a whole lot of use. And finally, a card I've picked out just because I like it is the Cooler, because he's a pretty cool guy. Essentially, since I didn't actually explain how the Gunter deck works, is there are a few basic mechanics anyway. Basic mechanics in it. First of all, you've got the exhausted creatures who come into play exhausted, and then when they change a lane, they're ready. Now, these are better explored in the Jake and Finn deck, and are quite poorly executed in this because there are only very few ways that they can be useful. However, cards like Fancy Spa make sure they are useful when they're still exhausted. This lets you draw a card if there's an exhausted creature in the same lane. The ice creatures all revolve around freezing your opponent's landscape. A frozen landscape can't have anything played into it, but can have stuff moved into it, and can't have anything replaced on it either. And Gunter gives all characters with a frozen token 1 attack if they're on your side of the field. And you can discard a card to remove a frozen token. I definitely should have explained that at the start of the video, but I absolutely didn't. There are cards that allow you to ready your fatigued cards, but most of the time they're going to spend a lot of time rested, which is why I don't think it's an amazing mechanic, but it's not bad because the creatures are quite strong. other creatures that are quite strong, other blue plains creatures that change their own lane. And for example, this 2-cost 4/5 Tired Wombat, who is an unbelievable character. However, it can be very costly if your opponent gains control of it due to changing lanes. That is essentially all the mechanics in this deck, I think. It certainly is. So I think that's all I really need to say. So what I would say is this is a great pickup for decks, for like starting players, because both decks are pretty balanced, and you can definitely play the Gunter deck to some great results. It's a very strong deck, but obviously if you were going to edit it, it's, going to be better. The Lemongrab deck, however, I wouldn't recommend making a deck out of, because I think the Paratroopers are bad, I think the Zebracorns are bad, I think the flip down mechanic is underpowered in a lot of places, and I think it's very easy to lose with the Lemongrab deck against players who are only just starting even, which, isn't particularly a bad thing since you're just teaching them a game, but at the end of the day, it's not going to help you win games against experienced players. So I think Gunter and Lemongrab is really good for helping you learn multiple landscapes. That's the word I'm going for. But other than that, I don't think it particularly excels compared to sets such as the Jake and Finn expansion, which has both very powerful decks, and I really look forward to doing that. That'll be the next one I do. Thank you for watching this video, and subscribe if you want to see some more Adventure Time reviews. And I also do Yu-Gi-Oh videos. If you play HeroClix, I have a channel in my recommended channels called Clicks Corner. And if you want general other fun, there are a lot of other things in my featured channels, mostly my accounts, which are a lot of fun. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.